Hi, you're with Julian on the Brown Note on Radio Northern Beaches and YouTube and podcasting and everything else with another list. I've been doing lists for months. That's all I'm going to do forever. So I had my top 200 tracks of all time, which ended. And last week I did my best and worst films of the year, a bit late. And now I'm doing my best albums of the year. Well, I did my best and worst films of the year. And this is just going to be my top 25 albums of the year, and I'll probably do tracks of the year as well, but this is all normally done and dusted long before. And after that film list where I didn't have access to use my laptop, so I was doing all manner of stuff. I actually have the power cable this time, so I have music, otherwise it would be a short show. So at number 20, and this is, I want to point out, the first list of any kind I've done with a joint position at any level, and it's joint first place. I want to get that out of the way straight away. I feel completely okay about doing a joint first place or a joint any number because I've never done it before. So you always get one get out of jail free card. And I listened to them both back to back and was like, I actually don't know. I would say that they are both equally good. Maybe I should have done that with the North. So Everything Everywhere All at Once won my films of the year, but I do think it is showing a clean pair of heels a tiny bit to my second favourite film of the year, The Northman. And what came after that? I think the top 5 was Nightmare Alley, Don't Look Up, and Elvis, Shock Horror. At number 25, a band known as Spiritualised. One of my favourites, my second favourite album of all time is Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space. Jason Pierce's long-running post-Spaceman 3 project is 30 years old now. And I think critics are missing out here because Sweetheart, he's had like a comeback now of 3 albums. Even though he's never spent more than 5 years away, Sweetheart, Sweet Light for me got a lot of acclaim, but I really detested it. I loved that one track, the opener, and I thought the rest of the album was garbage. I thought And Nothing Hurt was a much better album and got nowhere near the plaudits, but Everything Is Beautiful this year was fantastic. A really good album, and from that, at 25 in my albums of the year, one of the entries that is getting next to no love, but the Needle Drop included it in his albums of the year. I was very, very happy to see when bands get old and they're white and they're cis and heteronormative, critics just don't care. And I think I'd add that I slagged off critics for top 10 lists for including films that they've only seen at festivals where virtually no one's seen them, or they don't even come out till next year. I think music criticism has never been lower, because they just don't know what they're doing anymore. How many publications chose Beyonce as a Will This Do winner for Album of the Year? It has to fit and tick boxes for them to they don't know what they're doing. We've got the weakest era of music criticism this century. At number 24, it is Benito and Antonio Martina Ocasio from Puerto Rico. Bad Bunny had the biggest album of the year culturally from a pop perspective, which is important because I think probably Rosalia had the biggest album critically, ignoring Beyonce, because who cares about Beyonce? Honestly, how lame is it giving her album of the year? It's probably like the level of magnitude between Rosalia's Moso Mami and Beyonce's Renaissance. Renaissance. The level of artistic genius on one side and corporate crap on the other. But anyway, the biggest critical and commercial albums of the year were both Spanish language albums. So Bad Bunny, I have featured his previous albums on my show. Un Verano Sin Ti. At 24, I reviewed it and said that I felt the first half wasn't quite there. It's a double, it's a really long album, but the second half really sort of locked into a much more wide-ranging and adventurous sort of groove. Titi Mi Pregunto is a track that everyone has focused on for their tracks of the year. You can tell how bad music critics are now by the fact they pick the same tracks for track of the year. Honestly, Pusha T's got no mention in the Pitchfork tracks or albums of the year apart from Diet Coke, one of the least interesting tracks off of one of the best albums of the year. They all choose the same track. Go to another publication. It's Diet Coke again. It's Diet Coke again. Anyway, this is Titi Mi Pregunto, probably the most famous track on the commercial album of the year, which is very good, if not great. Last You're with Julian, counting down my albums of 2022. And certainly the top 10 is very good. I'll play some of this because it's an ambient album, so it's not really functional for radio play. And I do have to get through 13 tracks in the first hour to make the second hour viable. Burial, aka Will Bevan, the Anti-Dawn EP, which was his longest and closest to being a genuine full album for a very long time, but in a very much abstract ambient way. I shall play a bit from, as every track is sound collage music, I'll play a little bit. This is Shadow Paradise. That's Burial. At 23 with Anti-Dawn. At 22, Columbia via Berlin's Lucretia Dalt, who's made quite a few albums under her own name and others. Well, Lucretia or Lucretia Dalt. And connected with the how can I possibly forget? The guy that did Space's Only Noise. Nicholas Jar, with his record label. So her album as in AY, I thought it was really good. I didn't go overboard. I thought it was borderline EP versus album. It was a little bit slight, but it was still really, really good what was on there. So from that, Bochinch at number 22 from I by Lucretia Dalt. Columbia via Berlin and her album, and Bochinch at number 22. At number 21, Dan Snaith from Canada has achieved most recognition in his career recording as Caribou, a run of very prominent and acclaimed albums. His more dance-oriented version of himself, which I again liken to Nicholas Jar's Against All Logic, although those albums were amazing. This one is very good, and this is his most persuasive argument for the moniker Daphne, which he uses to make more club-based music. Cherry, really well sculpted album, really well based in sort of post-90s UK rave techno culture, and referencing a lot of different dance music styles, electronic styles from there on. But it's still sounding really quite state-of-the-art, really propulsive, and I thought it was an excellent album from that at number 21. And I can do a countdown because, it is countdown time. 25, Spiritualised, Everything Was Beautiful, Completely Ignored. 24, Bad Bunny, In Verano Sin Ti. If you're going to go corporate and choose a corporate album of the year, choose this and not Beyonce's Renaissance. God, I can't stand around Beyonce. 23, Burial's Anti-Dawn EP. His first sort of album proper in a long while, which was ambient noise, which everyone was really waiting for. Lucretia Dalt at 22 with that album, and Daphne with the album Cherry and Arrow at 21. Daphne and Cherry at 21. In my top 20 albums of the year, at number 20, one of the two hardcore noise crossover moments of the year was Chat Pile from Oklahoma, sounding like the titular slag heap, which Chat Pile is, basically a big hill of the remnants of whatever nature-destroying enterprise was happening there. And their album, God's Country, had some of the most confronting music of the year on it, and also some of the most empathetic. The track Why, about homeless people, was just fantastic. And some of the other tracks about abusive people and serial killery people were terrifying. This leaning towards the more listening end of things is Anywhere from Chat Pile at number 20. At number 19 in my albums of the year, another one alongside Spiritualised, missed out from most lists, a wonderful electronic music project called Half Moon Bay from Tomu DJ from California. who I accused of being Japanese. I still don't even know, to be honest. That's how much I research. Or I said there was some flavour there. But based in California. Follow-up to Feminista, debut album, or their debut album. And Half Moon Bay, I thought was one of the best electronic releases of the year. And from that, at number 19, Sunsets. Number 18, Keef Farrell Koza. I've played on my radio show an awful lot. I became obsessed around the release of I Don't Like back in, I think, 2012. And he was set to become a terrible, massive rap star with a huge first album and a massive gap between them, and was embroiled in controversy at a very young age, gun charges, house arrest, kicked off his record label. And he didn't go down that road. He became the Captain Beefheart of rap. He became one of the most interesting figures in rap music by never ever trying to become that superstar, and releasing extremely left field weird music ever since. Dozens of albums. I've featured probably a dozen of his albums on my radio show, where he pursues a collaborative angle or a soundscape angle, and never ever going anywhere near the mainstream, or hardly at all. And he's actually probably ground zero, if anyone can be, for two incredibly important things. One is mumble rap, which gets a very there's not much kudos going on there so much, but Chicago drill, UK drill, is now probably the preeminent style of rap globally, and he is ground zero for Chicago drill. Well, he came back with For Nem, and it's his most upfront, energized, and direct rapping performances. That's what hasn't been necessarily the focus of his other projects. This one really was him at his most impassioned, and he never really is like that on albums. So it was an amazing project and deserved a lot more kudos again. And this opening track, Bitchware, will probably contain swearing. So at number 18, Chief Keef. For Nem, why isn't this getting, basically because he's in the margins as far as music critics are concerned, but a great album from him. Number 17, 3 albums into their return from their glorious 90s heyday, one of the great alt-rock bands of the 90s, the Afghan Whigs, one of the great album discographies of the 90s as far as alt-rock music went. They never pigeonholed into grunge, and they sort of existed on their own terms, even though they was sort of hoovered up by that milieu at the start of it all. They definitely broadened out into a much more interesting act. And they've had 3 comeback albums now, and I think this is by far their best. How Do You Burn at number 17 in my albums of the year. They were known as a drunken Lothario, all character-based music, but what would be considered perhaps problematic in the modern era. They use both sides of the coin here on How Do You Burn, and I think this last track really sort of almost celebrates that previous iteration of the band. Greg Dooley's wonderful, the Afghan Whigs, and this is the final track from it, as good an example of their best album since the 90s I can find. And number 16 in my albums of the year, the 932nd studio album by Neil Young this year. Actually, I think the 8th release by Neil Young in 2022 alone. Most of those are the archival projects he keeps releasing. The Noise and Flowers was brilliant. That live album was a set list from heaven. And he didn't release any bad music this year for me, not the ones that I heard anyway. There was a rediscovered Crazy Horse album, which was the terrible Are You Passionate album, given a much better version, I thought, with Crazy Horse. That was from around the start of the 2000s. But you open the 2022 with Barn, a perfectly serviceable, again, Crazy Horse album. And he's released World Record right at the end of the year. And for me, the difference between the two albums is the difference between World Record, my 16th best album of the year, and a lot of the more serviceable recent releases that he's done, including with Crazy Horse. And it's an overabundance of personality. It really did push out into areas where they just didn't care. He's not really cared much about anything that anyone's thought for a very long time. But this one was a real wild ride with some really odd instrumentation throughout the album, almost like sea shanties and organs. More guitar than I was led to believe on an album where he doesn't play guitar on the majority of the tracks. It's still got some absolute burners on there. And the lyrics as well, and the band performances. His trademark now is a sort of ramshackle court live music, as denoted by the previous album, Barn. Is on YouTube. You can just watch the whole thing being played live in the barn. So he's gone down that road for better or worse. But this time around, I really feel like he's hit a particular groove. And I mentioned that it's sort of wild, carefree abandon on this album, and going down avenues fearlessly without caring. It kind of reminded me of Tonight's the Night. Not that it's as good as that album, but that sort of vibe came through. So I thought it was a standout of his recent, going all the way back to probably Psychedelic Pill, which again was much more in that sort of same vein as Barn, but a much vaster project, and probably the most satisfying Neil Young album of recent times. But this one had a real cult feel to it. And I really enjoyed. It's like one of the tracks is a real slow burn classic, Crazy Horse Jam, but a lot of the other ones are just really just off the wall, interesting, and that's what held me. So my 16th best album of the year is Neil Young and World Record. This is The World's in Trouble Now. That's a great example of the abandon and the fact that they don't really try and emulate music they've done in the past. They're sort of pushing into weird avenues. And number 16, Neil Young and Crazy Horse, World Record, the pinnacle of his recent studio output for me. And number 15, the duo of Georgia Ellery and Taylor Skye from the UK, one of the most anticipated debut albums of the year after a couple of EPs showcasing bizarro, off-the-wall production styles, I guess post-Sophie maybe a little bit. Not strictly hyperpop, but sort of in this realm of experimental production. Less so, I thought, on their debut than I've been led to believe. I thought it was a little bit more explainable than I was expecting, but still very, very good. And I should point out, Georgia Ellery was or is in a member of Black Country New Road, the UK indie collective who appear a lot later in this list, which is very exciting. So I Love You, Jennifer B, the highest ranked debut album of the year so far, and this track, Concrete Over Water. Number 14, The Smile, the most pointless band of the year. It's essentially Radiohead and obviously Tom York and John Greenwood. Don't like their bass player and drummer anymore, so went and made a Radiohead album without them, with a new drummer, Tom Skinner. Honestly, why they didn't just include Tom Skinner in Radiohead and just made an album with two drummers is so close to a Radiohead album, much more so than Tom York's solo output. But as everyone pointed out, their best non-Radiohead project. I noticed the bass player from Radiohead turned up playing with Nick Cave and for the Carnage tour in Australia a few days ago. So maybe he's going, yeah, up yours. I'm doing my thing with Nick Cave now, which would be fair, but I just don't get it. I mean, it's like they remade King of Limbs, but actually made a really good album instead. I wasn't as overblown with praise when I reviewed it. I said that I thought the second half was a pure classic and the first half meandered a little. Still, though, it was full of great tracks. Even that first half had some really, really great tracks on it. And A Light for Attracting Attention is my 14th best album of the year. And I guess much more in tune with that experimental post-Kid A Radiohead than the likes of In Rainbows and Moonshaped Pool. Their two high points, probably post-Kid A album-wise, have been very different to that kind of King of Limbs Radiohead, whereas this was very much in that pocket. I don't know that I remember the lyrics much on this album. I know that there were, dystopian themes and consumerism and the world and stuff, but I just didn't really remember it. But the cool tracks were really cool. And it was a great album. A Light for Attracting Attention and number 14. This is Thin Thing. And number 13, another of the albums that's not getting picked up by anyone else's lists, and quite remarkably so. The second from Dundalk in Ireland's Just Mustard, barely fitting in the shoegaze genre, a little bit noisier. Their second album after Wednesday, Heart Under, I thought was fantastic, really dark, quite malevolent, and I thought in the Katie Ball was one of the finds of the year. Her voice is amazing and fits into a lot of different and often trauma-inducing styles, and I thought it was a great album. Real sort of death disco feel to it, very sort of almost Joy Division-y feel to it. Very sort of bleak and like wailing at times. A really strong album that seems to have just got forgotten. I don't know how. Did come out earlier in the year. So from my 13th best album of the year from Just Mustard, Heart Under, this is Blue Chalk. Salt, the UK collective, arguably the greatest band in the world at the moment, actually has some members listed on its Wikipedia page. Inflo, Cleo Sol and Kid's sister, for the broadly anonymous project that since 2019, now this is a shock, they released 5 in 2019, the album 7, the album Untitled and Black Is, Untitled Rise, that was their 4th album in 2020. They released the album 9, which was available for 99 days in 2021, and an orchestral album, which I thought was amazing, called Air, which came out in April this year, which was their 7th album, 6th studio album. Well, they actually released 5 albums on the 1st of November for free, and I didn't even realise. So they're up to 11 albums since 2019. So they released 5 albums on the 1st of November. I was actually overseas until the middle of November, and from a couple of weeks before that, I totally missed 5 albums by the band at number 12 in my list. I think their music's incredible. And they're obviously operating on a very ethical wavelength in the way that they release music and the lack of cashing in on any of it. They've done, and the connection with Little Sims is one of the few that you get. They're not out there producing everyone else's music just who they want to. Little Sims released an album over Christmas as well, which is apparently very good. I haven't heard that yet. So Salt's Air was a very interesting broadly classical album release, and it veered into tangents at times. I think this track does a bit. From my 12th best album of the year, another one that was missed off of virtually everyone's list, Salt and Air, and this track June 55. At number 20, Chat Pile, God's Country. At 19, Tomu DJ, Criminally Ignored, Half Moon Bay. 18, Chief Keef, For Them. Another criminally ignored album. So was the Afghan Whigs, How Do You Burn at 17. Neil Young and Crazy Horse again ignored at 16. World Record, Jockstrap, less so at 15 with I Love You, Jennifer B. And Tom York and Johnny Greenwood's The Smile Project at 14 with A Light for Attracting Attention, Just Mustard. And Blue Chalk was a track I played, Heart Under, the album, their second at 13, and that was Just Then, Salt. And the album Air, and I missed 5 albums from them this year because I was away. At number 11, Victoria Legrand and Alex Scally, long established as one of the most popular and beloved alt-rock acts in the world. Beach House, I don't even know what album they're up to now. Once Twice Melody kicks off, well no, it's at number 11. Once Twice Melody is their 8th studio album. And whereas they continually, like the War on Drugs, try and sculpt the perfect version of their album, this time they actually let it fly into 4 sides. So it was like 4 EPs, 4 tracks on each. Beautiful. They're so classy. I love the fact that it was so symmetrical. And each functioned as an EP on its own. And even though it might not have been as consistent as their albums, which are normally perfect, it was still one of the best albums of the year. So at number 11, Once Twice Melody from Beach House and Only You Know. So we're into the top 10 albums of the year, and yet another criminally ignored one. Indio Sparke from Sydney. I loved her very spectral, almost medieval debut album. It was a fully realised aesthetic. And her second album, Hysteria, was a much more mainstream record where her voice, amazing voice, was front and centre, and the arrangements and the songs were much more mainstream. And they seemed to get a little bit of a polite praise from critics, almost like double-edged praise, where they were kind of not that acclaimed by it. I thought it was fantastic, mainly because the big songs on it was so good. And I thought it was a better album in that sort of vein than the Angel Olsen album was. So Hysteria at number 10, and a good example of how at least half the tracks on there had incredibly strong hooks, verses, melodies, and her voice carrying it all. And a good example from my number 10 album from Indio Sparke from Sydney, Hysteria, and This God Is a Woman's Name. At 9, everyone chose Soul Glow's Diaspora Problems, like Chat Pile, one of the hardcore music breakthroughs, crossovers of the year. I think they're probably their debut album proper. Fantastic, abrasive, artistic, very politicised, very humanistic, and almost very post, I guess, at the drive-in at their peak. And it really did offer a great deal of crossover potential for music that can get locked in its genre lane, as with Chat Pile as well, which means that other people listen to it that don't normally listen to that kind of music. And pretty much everyone had it near the top of their list there. So Soul Glow, Diaspora Problems, it will be very noisy, possible swearing, and Coming Correct is cheaper. At my 9th best album of 2022. At number 8, out of the, also as with Beach House from Maryland, Bill Callahan, long established as one of the most beloved singer-songwriters in America. His baritone and almost genial delivery across a raft of great albums, from pretty much for me Dream River in 2013. I think that these last two albums have been two of his most interesting. The Blind Date Party album with Bonnie Prince Billy was a fantastic cover album from last year, but Reality, I think, is the pinnacle of his recent solo albums. Certainly I liked it more than Shepherd in the Sheepskin Vest and Gold Record. I thought it was a fantastic album, some of his most pronounced songs, and he let the arrangements go off into almost jam sessions at times. And some of his, probably 3 or 4 of his best ever songs, including this one, Naked Souls, from my 8th best album of the year. Again, missing from a lot of lists, Reality from Bill Callahan and Naked Souls. Truncating Everything, because I won't fit it in the show. At number 7, she's been around forever and known as the woman that sings on trip hop records or dance records, Beth Orton. Just took a chance with a much more artistically fragmented album and came out with one of the best of the year, my 7th best, Weather Alive, another pick by many people. Really sort of abstract, very post-COVID, and very fitting with the modern age, the anxieties and the sort of collage techniques involved. Really felt like a rebirth as an artist. A fantastic album, front to back, a lot of long-form songs that percolate and exist as wisps at times. A really, really stunning album, and this track from it, my 7th best of the year, Weather Alive by Beth Orton, and Friday Night. Biggest criminal miss on everyone's list this year was undoubtedly Sun's signature self-titled EP/album, the first prominent album-length release from Elizabeth Fraser, the best alternative singer in UK history, I think, and up there with the likes of Kate Bush as far as her use of the amazing voice that she's got in such incredible ways. Her first prominent release since the Cocteau Twins, really, other than appearing on several iconic tracks like Teardrops by Massive Attack. I think it belongs alongside My Bloody Valentine, Slow Dive, and ride the holy trinity of shoegaze. The analogous music of shoegaze was dream pop, and the Cocteau Twins were the birth of dream pop. So it's kind of like the four horsemen of the British indie apocalypse from the early 90s. I thought it was a magnificent album. It was so good. It was so good. It used her voice exactly like you'd want it to be used. It's still an undimmed force of godlike nature. And Sun's Signature was near perfect for me. And I thought underappreciated by everyone, kind of ignored. But yeah, she is obviously amazing. And from my sixth best album of the year, which is a self-titled debut by Sun's Signature, featuring the incomparable voice of Elizabeth Fraser, this track, Apples. Sun's Signature at number 6 in my albums of the year with their self-titled debut and the return of Elizabeth Fraser. At number 5, Pusha T, Terence Thornton, ex of Clips, whose Hell Have No Fury is my number 1 rap album of the century so far. And took a while once he split with his brother, No Malice, as he's called now, it took a while for him to establish his solo career, and did so with gusto with Daytona in 2018, and his association with Kanye West being the head of the record label, which he just announced that he's left due to Kanye being a little too fond of Hitler, I believe. Anyway, Daytona was a short-form masterpiece, and he followed it up with a long-form version almost of the same thing. It's Almost Dry. It was, again, one of the albums of the year that didn't appear in a lot of lists, and I was very surprised by that. I think we've got the worst era of music journalism going at the moment. I think that the people that are being picked are just focusing on garbage because they don't really have a lot of taste, and they're picking music based on it fitting certain tick boxes more than anything else. Didn't even feature in the top 50 Pitchfork albums of the year. Amazing stuff. It's Almost Dry, another classic from Pusha T, and this track from It Will Contain Swearing, I Pray For You, reunites him with his brother No Malice. So a pretty big thing to end an album on. It's such a great move, bringing his brother back for the last verse on the whole album. Pusha T at 5, It's Almost Dry. At number 4, a decade in, Abel Tesfaye from Canada, aka The Weeknd, is on an incredible artistic run at the moment. After Hours was my number 1 album of the year a couple of years ago. Not far off this time around with Dawn FM, and a concept album about death and being in a journey to death with Drive Time Radio, as if death couldn't be any worse. At number 4, Dawn FM from The Weeknd and This Gasoline. Near classic, Dawn FM at number 4 in my albums of the year. At number 3, well, I might as well do a countdown. There's a reason for that. At 10, Indigo Sparke, Hysteria. Soul Glow, Diaspora Problems. At 9, 8, Bill Callahan, Reality. His best out of the recent run. Beth Orton, again, Rebirth as an artist with Weather Alive at 7. Sun's Signature, Criminally Underappreciated at 6. Their self-titled debut album. Pusha T, It's Almost Dry at number 5, and that was The Weeknd at number 4. And at number 3, well, we really are picking the last few years I've gone on at length about the incredible rebirth of angular indie guitar music from the UK, from Working Men's Club to Black Country New Road to Squid. Wasn't a big fan of the Wet Leg album. The Dry Cleaning one, I never gave the second album a listen. I should give that a listen, but I wasn't a massive fan of the first. And right at the top of the pile, Black Midi have been incredible. Their new album, Hellfire, one of their wildest artistic statement. Really incredible and imaginative and all over the shop and done with gusto and humour. From Hellfire, this is Welcome to Hell from Black Midi. So I said at the start we had a joint number 1, the first time I've ever done a tie in any capacity in any of my lists. But I couldn't separate them, and they were both albums that were a clean pair of heels to everything else I heard this year. The level of artistry, the curation over the course of the album, the imagination in the constructs of the songs and the instruments and the soundstage, just were phenomenal on both albums, and hearing them side by side, I couldn't really pick. I think I gave one 9.5 out of 10, and the other, my first review on YouTube, was a 10 out of 10. So the first of my 2 number 1 albums of 2022 is Rosalia Villa Tobela from Catalan in Spain, who is absolutely at the apex of Spanish language music, which seems to be taking over everything. Her third album, I put El Mal Quiera, her second album, in my top 10 albums of 2018. And this one was a maximalist, incredible showcase of everything that she can do, which is considerably more than Beyonce. How this album has finished second to Beyonce's Renaissance in just about every poll. It is so far ahead. No one track embodies the whole album, as they all seem to occupy a particular space in the story the album is telling. An incredible journey. It veers from her traditional, incredible voice across a more traditional singing style into the most avant-garde music out there. This is the one concession to pop, pure pop on the album. As I said, no one track really embodies everything that is so special about the classic Moto Mami from Rosalia, my joint number 1 album of the year, and this from it, La Fama, featuring The Weeknd. And that's my joint number 1 album, Rosalia Moto Mami. No album was better than that this year, including my other joint number 1 album of the year, Black Country New Road. Ants from up there. Everything I said about the Rosalia album, I say about this album. And days after it came out, the lead singer of this post-Arcade Fire funeral emotive indie high point, Isaac Wood, left the band due to mental health problems, and nothing has been heard from him a year later since. I'll play out with this, Chaos Space Marine, from my joint number 1 albums of the year, Rosalia Moto Mami and Black Country New Road. Ants from up there. Full reviews of both on the YouTube channel, and I gave this a 10 out of 10. Adios.